Hello and welcome to another episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. We are here live on both YouTube and Twitter at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, February 19th. If you are watching on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel, please make sure to drop this episode a like and make sure you are subscribed to the channel. If you're on Twitter, you can leave a comment and I will get here or I'll get back to you at some point throughout today's show, and make sure you're following me on Twitter at BRamsey KSR. But we have a lot to get into on today's episode of All Fired Up. We are going to be talking several different things, including what in the world is wrong with Coach Bill Self and the Kansas Jayhawks. We're going to be talking about just how good this Wisconsin Badgers team. Can they win the Big Ten? Can they make a Final Four? Are they national championship contender good? We'll get into a little bit of all of that around the Big Ten. We're going to talk about the UConn Huskies and how they survived a potential disaster last night against Villanova. And then we're going to kind of whip around the SEC. There were 3 games last night. There are however many there are tonight. Also preview a couple of the other biggest games on the Wednesday night slate. But if you have any questions about any of the games or would like me to talk about anything specific for this evening's slate or just college basketball in general, and you were watching here live, please just hop into the comments section. That's what it's there for. That's why we do these shows live, is to interact with the viewers. So please do not hesitate to hop into the chat and either just say what's up or drop a question, and we will talk about it throughout today's episode of All Fired Up. But as I mentioned, we have to start with the Kansas Jayhawks and what went wrong in Provo last night against BYU. This is a Kansas team that is now 17-9 overall and 8-7 in the Big 12 after dropping back-to-back road games to Utah and BYU. They still have to play Texas Tech and Arizona at Allen Fieldhouse and have a trip to Houston. So it could get a little interesting down the stretch here for the Jayhawks. But last season, when Kansas wasn't overly great either, they finished 23-11 overall. They were a 4 seed and lost to Gonzaga in the NCAA tournament. The issue with that team was shooting. They had one of the lowest three-point shooting volumes in the country last season and shot just 33.6% from three-point range. They went out and it seemed like they really addressed those issues in the transfer portal. That's why a lot of folks, admittedly myself included, had the Jayhawks number 1 in the preseason this year, because not only did they bring back several of their key pieces, but they went out and got Zeke Mayo, they got David Coit, they got Rylan Griffin, they got AJ Storr. It was like, how can you not be excited, especially when you mix in some of the freshmen, Flory Badunga, and different guys, and then you bring back All-American and Hunter Dickinson, DeJuan Harris, one of the best two-way point guards in the country, KJ Adams, and everything that he can bring to the table on both ends of the floor. But now I think the fool's gold of the issue was those returning guys. And it's funny because it's something I preach a lot of times. Now, granted, I don't normally preach it for teams that were a 4 seed and made the second round of the NCAA tournament, but there's a lot of times where, say, a team's 500, let's just take we're just say Penn State. Like, if Penn State returns everybody next year, I don't necessarily look at that as a good thing. Penn State's not very good. So sometimes having a bunch of returners can sort of be a curse more than it is a blessing. And I think that what Coach Bill Self has gotten himself into is you almost kind of become a prisoner of these guys that have helped you win games. And it's the same issue that sometimes you have when looking to make a coaching change, and that's what you're looking at with this Kansas roster. Is we have a pretty good thing going on. Honestly, I look at it as making their roster decisions. By no means, none of this is talking about Bill Self losing his job. Let's make that very clear. But Kentucky basketball the last few years, things weren't bad. They weren't good by a Kentucky standard, but it was, can we improve upon this by making a change? Well, Kansas's roster is somewhat different. Like, nothing's going wrong. Nothing's bad necessarily at Kansas, they're going to still win a lot of games. They're going to be an NCAA tournament team, and heck, they could go on a run. But are you actually going to reach the mountaintop when you have DeJuan Harris, KJ Adams, and Hunter Dickinson as your three featured players? And it can become tough because why would you want to kick DeJuan Harris to the curb? As a freshman, he was a starting point guard on a national championship team. Why would you want to kick KJ Adams to the curb? He was a role player on that championship team and was a big part of a team that got a 1 seed just 2 seasons ago. Now, granted, that team lost in the second round of the NCAA tournament, and it's a team that was a 4 seed last year, and once again lost in the second round of the NCAA tournament. But it can be really hard to make the decision that, okay, maybe those guys aren't the answer, and we need to completely rebuild this thing. And I think in hindsight, that might be where Kansas is at. Is, okay, that's great. You brought in these shooting pieces to surround these guys with, but there's not enough space for them. There's not enough minutes for them. There's not enough shots for them because you have this omnipresent featured player in the post in Hunter Dickinson. And I think Hunter Dickinson's great. I probably like him, honestly, more than a lot of people who, it's kind of fun and trendy to dump on Hunter Dickinson a little bit. That's not me. I think he's a really darn good player, and he establishes a very high floor. But does he also establish a little bit of a lower ceiling, especially when you have a point guard who really can't shoot, doesn't want to shoot, and you have a 4-man who's really not interested in scoring outside of 3 feet? And you look at the starting lineup that the Jayhawks rolled out there last night. You were starting 4 non-shooters. You started DeJuan Harris, who is 20 of 70, 28.6% from 3-point range this year. You started KJ Adams at the 3, who was 0 for 0 from 3. You started Florida Badunga at the 4, who was 0 for 0 from 3 this season. And you started Hunter Dickinson at the 5, who was 9 of 39 from 3 this season. It doesn't matter. And Zeke Mayo has been outstanding. He has came from being the Summit League Player of the Year at South Dakota State and has seamlessly fit in as a really good guard in the Big 12. He's made 64 threes this year at 40%. He's been everything that Coach Bill Self and all of us nationally thought Zeke Mayo would be for this team. But it doesn't matter how much of a flamethrower Zeke Mayo has when literally he's the only shooting threat on the court. The other guys aren't really even looking at the rim when they have the ball. And you're able to go underneath all the ball screens. You're able to just no help off of Zeke Mayo. And it's like, okay, well, now who's DeJuan Harris going to play make to when they can sag off of him also? And then you can throw so much attention at Hunter Dickinson when he gets a catch inside. You can take away the lob threats of KJ Adams, whether it be on the short roll for KJ Adams or the lob threat for Florida Badunga. And it just is so congested around the basket and in the paint for this Gonzaga team. And you bring in some of these pieces, and again, it just hasn't worked because you're not putting them in the positions where they excelled in the past. Like you bring in AJ Storr, who was arguably the best player at Wisconsin last year. Well, now you're trying to piece him in as this role player, and he is 18 of 36 or 18 of 63, 28.6% from 3-point range. He played 18 minutes last night in a loss. He played 12 minutes in the loss before that, played 8 minutes in the game before that. He scored 10 points in his last 3 games combined. That's a guy that was averaging like 15 a game last year for a solid Wisconsin team. You have Rylan Griffin, who in the system that is Alabama, run and gun. We're playing in transition. We're shooting the first open 3. You have a dynamic creator in Mark Sears. He was 74 of 189, nearly 30% from 3-point range last year. What is he this year? 33 of 92, 35.9%. Is that bad? Obviously not, but the volume isn't there, and it's just not getting as good of looks because this offense puts no pressure on the defense. David Coit came from Northern Illinois, one of the top scorers in college basketball last season, made 93 3-point shots, but he was a ball in his hands kind of dynamic shot creator last season at Northern Illinois. Well, now the ball's in DeJuan Harris's hands. You're feeding it to Hunter Dickinson. Coit he's playing off the ball now so much as a 5'11 guard and he's 30 of 80 from three, 37.5%, shooting one of his better percentages. But again, the volume isn't there. He's not being put in the positions to excel in the way that he did in the past. So you have these transfer pieces that have now been put into kind of illogical roles for them. And it's surprising to see me for a coach like Bill Self, who has been thought of as the best active coach in college basketball for so long. And Kansas was just, whether it was national championships, just, ripping off one seed year after year. Winning the Big 12 was inevitable. And now, this team's still, again, they're good. Like, let's not forget, let's not overcompensate here. They beat Michigan State on a neutral floor. They beat Duke on a neutral floor. It was just a couple weeks ago that they beat Iowa State by 17 points in Lawrence. So the sky isn't necessarily falling, but man, when you lose 91-57 to BYU, that's not something that Jayhawks fans are used to. And I do think that you have kind of become a prisoner to these players that have helped you be very good. And heck, they actually did help you reach the mountaintop back in 2022 to win the national championship. But maybe now you just have to recalibrate things offensively if you are the Jayhawks. Travis, the Storr has been very disappointing this year. Again, this is a guy that was essentially the best player on a team last season, but I'm sure he wishes he wasn't there too, because again, he's not being featured in the way that he was at Wisconsin. He's playing with a non-shooting point guard. He's playing next to non-shooting players in the front court. He's playing with a guy who you're going to feed, if you have Hunter Dickinson on your team, you're going to feed him the ball. There's no sense in having him if you're not going to play through Hunter Dickinson. But it is kind of a hindsight situation now where it's like, well, again, like maybe you wish you didn't have Hunter Dickinson. And I think that can sound crazy, but when you get to this point in the season and you're 17-9, it's a question worth having. Is Bill Self going the way of John Calipari? I think it's too soon to say that. Again, I think we're probably at the beginning stages of that, and we're gonna have to see how it plays out. There was a time where, like, when Coach Cal lost to St. Peter's, it was a one-off. But then it became not a one-off, because then you missed the tournament, then you lose again to Oakland. You don't make it out a second weekend or the first weekend. You lose in the first round of the SEC tournament. So that we're still in the beginning stage of this. Like, again, let's not forget, just a few years ago, this Kansas team won a national championship. They're just 2 years removed from being a number one seed in the NCAA tournament. But if it's, one and done or two and done again this year, and then it doesn't get better next year, I think next year you can really start to have that conversation, because you are going to kind of forcefully recalibrate this roster, because DeJuan Harris isn't going to be there. KJ Adams isn't going to be there. Hunter Dickinson isn't going to be there. So I think that if Coach Self can't revamp this roster and then do something with it through the regular season and into the postseason, then you can start to have some questions about him. But I think for now, you kind of have to just let this play out, see what happens in March, and then give him a real chance to turn over the roster. We've mentioned AJ Storr and Wisconsin, but speaking of the Badgers, is there a team in college basketball right now playing better than the Badgers? I don't know if there is. They're now 21-5 on the season, 11-4 in the Big Ten after winning 5 straight, including a last 2 of a win in West Lafayette, 94-84 over Purdue, and then 95-74 in a dominant performance last night against Illinois. They've now won 13 of their last 15 games since starting Big Ten play 0-2. It's probably too late for this Badgers team to win the Big Ten, but I think that there's a real chance that we're going to go into March, go into the Big Ten tournament, go into the NCAA tournament, saying that Wisconsin is the best team in the Big Ten. They're 2 games back now of Michigan. Michigan's 12-2. Michigan State is 12-3. Wisconsin is 12-4. Wisconsin still goes to Michigan State on March 2nd, We have a game coming up on Friday night between Michigan and Michigan State. Um, so that can start to shake up the standings a little bit. So it's not out of the question that Wisconsin could make a run here, but it's probably too little too late. But like I said, they are playing as well as anybody. John Tonji has certainly emerged as an All-American and quite possibly a first-team All-American at this point. It's been one of the best transfers in college basketball. He had 31 points again last night. He always does it so efficiently. He is shooting 55.6% from two-point range, 41.1% from three-point range, and over 90% from the foul line on one of the top free throw rates in the Big Ten. He is really, really fun to watch, and this is not your father's Wisconsin team. This is not a Bo Ryan offense. Now that it's efficient like those teams were, but the last two games out, they've scored 94 and 95 points. They're number 6 in KenPom adjusted offensive efficiency. They shoot threes at a high rate. 48% of their shots come from beyond the arc. It's one of the top 3-point rates in all of college basketball, and they shoot 36.8% from three. So with their guard play, with the way their front court can stretch the floor a little bit, you have Steven Crowell, their 7-footer, who has made some threes this season. You have Nolan Winter, kind of a pick and pop 6'11" guy that can make some threes as well. But both of those guys are also elite around the basket. Crowell is shooting 60% from two, and Winter shooting over 70% from two, and they're both in the high 30s from 3-point range. So Wisconsin has quickly became one of my favorite teams to watch in college basketball. Coach Greg Gard has himself a legitimate contender, I think, to make a Final Four. Like I said, it's probably too late for them to be a Big Ten champion, but can they make a Final Four? Are they even flirting on having the tools and the metrics expected for national championship teams? I think so. It's hard to say otherwise right now. And John Tonji, that's a name that you're going to be hearing about come March that maybe you're not super familiar with, but he can flat out play. BBN, thank you for being here and jumping into the comments. Now, we talked about what's wrong with Kansas. We talked about how darn good Wisconsin is playing. Let's take it and I guess kind of find a little bit of a middle ground because UConn avoided a disaster last night, which would have been losing at home to Villanova. They escaped that one 66-59. They were down by double figures in this game. I'm going to look at KenPom here real quick. They had a 10.3% win probability with 11 minutes to go when they trailed by 14 points in the second half. If Connecticut would have lost this game, we would have been legitimately in a situation where our two-time defending national champion was on the bubble. They would have been on the bubble if they lost at home last night to Villanova. Now, they would have been on the right side of the bubble. They would have probably made the NCAA tournament because, A, they would have won some of these games down the stretch in the Big East, and B, let's face it, they're going to get every benefit of the doubt as the two-time defending national champions. And now it's a moot point. They're fine. They found a way to win the game. That's what good teams do. But it seems like a lot of our trepidation surrounding this team in the preseason has turned out to be correct. And I talked about it in my Big East preview on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show. I said, are we giving Coach Dan Hurley and the two-time defending national champions, are we sort of giving them too much grace for just being what they are? And let's face it, some of it was like almost being scared of, if I say that they're the 7th best team in the Big East, Coach Dan Hurley is going to, call out my podcast and say that I'm an insane person. Well, I kind of think that we all probably weren't taking it far enough. I think I said on my Big East preview that if you just looked at their roster in a vacuum, it wasn't a top 25 roster. Well, not only is that true, but it's one step further that this is barely an NCAA tournament roster. Liam McNeely's had a very, very good freshman season. Solo Ball has really emerged as one of the better shooters in college basketball. But I think that kind of having Alex Karabin as your star, this was a guy that was a preseason All-American, essentially consensus across the board. That just hasn't worked this year. Quite frankly, Hassan Diarra hasn't made the jump that some people expected him to make this year. Terrence Reed has made a little bit of a jump, but then Aiden Mahaney, the transfer from St. Mary's, that's been one of the most disappointing transfers in terms of expectations. probably in college basketball. So you just had a lot of guys that either haven't transitioned well to having to have larger roles, or guys that maybe haven't made the leap that you expected, or some transfers that sort of just fell flat. And I think when you look at it again from a lens of what they lost last season, it's just so incredibly hard to replace that. Lottery pick in Stephon Castle, a huge interior presence in Donovan Clingan, who was able to change the game for you defensively. And then obviously you have Cam Spencer as well, who was one of the premier shot makers in the game last season. It's just going to be really hard to make up for all that, and you're certainly seeing that this one. And I didn't even mention Tristan Newton, who was an All-American among the group last year, is one of the best point guards in the nation. So it just, I think we all wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt this year, and they were the two-time defending national champions. They probably deserved that, but it was probably an instance where our eyes were correct that this wasn't a top 25 team. This is a team that is a good, but certainly not great and not even really good team, to be quite honest. So it's going to be interesting to see how UConn handles things down the stretch. They have to go to St. John's on Sunday. They still have a game at Providence. They have to host Marquette, and they also host Georgetown and Seton Hall. And their Seton Hall, obviously being the team they lost to in overtime, one of the most shocking results of this season. So will be interesting to follow UConn down the stretch. Some of the other results from last night: Mississippi State picked up a big win against Texas A&M. Texas A&M, the team that I've talked about a lot. I do not enjoy watching them play. I'm not the biggest Buzz Williams fan. I know a lot of media love him because he gives good sound bites and all that kind of stuff. I just don't buy into a lot of it, and I just don't really respect their style of play because I don't think they even really attempt to play basketball. Now, what I do respect them for, and I genuinely mean this as a compliment to Coach Buzz Williams and the Aggies, but they have gotten as good as anybody, honestly, just about ever at just playground hoops. Like, it's athleticism, it's putting their hands on you, it's rebounding missed shots, and just sort of bullying their way to victory. They have become one of the best in the country at it year in and year out, and they've probably excelled at it more this year than even in previous seasons. But it caught up to them a little bit last night when they just can't make a shot and they score 54 points. Mississippi State was able to defensive rebound as well as anybody has this season against the Aggies, getting 70% of their misses. Josh Hubbard goes out and scores 25 points. Mississippi State, now they went on the road and win at Ole Miss. Now they beat Texas A&M. They're now 7-6 in SEC play with about as favorable of a schedule down the stretch as you can have in the gauntlet of the SEC. So they're a team now that's looking at probably finishing in the top half of the SEC standings, and that means avoiding having to play on Wednesday of the SEC tournament. LSU also won last night against South Carolina, keeping the Gamecocks at now 0-13 in SEC play. And then the other game was Florida, who just sort of mollywopped Oklahoma 85-63. Florida's now won 5 straight to move to 23-3 overall. They do have Micah Hanglaughton back now as well to add some depth to the front court. He had 2 points, 5 rebounds, and a block shot last night in 16 minutes. Walter Clayton Jr. led 5 scores in double figures with 18 points in that game last night. Do have to give a quick shout out to a friend of the program, Coach A.W. Hamilton at Eastern Kentucky. The Colonels have now ripped off 8 straight victories. They were 9-11, 3-4 in the A-Sun just a month ago. And now, after beating Lipscomb, the number 1 team in the A-Sun last night, Eastern Kentucky is knocking on the door of having a chance to win the league. You have North Alabama at 12-3, and then Lipscomb and Eastern Kentucky now at 11-4 in the A-Sun. So credit to Eastern Kentucky and the Colonels. They won 66-57 last night against Lipscomb. Devontae Blanton had 22 points, 12 rebounds in that game. Continues to be one of the best players there for the Colonels. And yes, Travis, you're right. Speaking of Eastern Kentucky, definitely prayers out to everybody impacted in the state with the tragic flooding going on in that area. And it's unfortunate, not just Eastern Kentucky, but Kentucky in general. Just doesn't seem to be able to catch a break with some of these natural disasters over the course of the past few years. So yes, please keep everybody out in Eastern Kentucky in your thoughts and prayers in the days, weeks, months to come. That's not something that you're able to overcome in a short period of time. Turning the page to a quick little Wednesday night preview. We'll mention this game first and then get into the Southeastern Conference. But out in the Mountain West, we have New Mexico at Boise State. New Mexico coming off of a big win on Sunday evening against Utah State. Coach Richard Pitino's team has now won 8 consecutive games, 22-4 overall, 14-1 in the Mountain West. They are at Boise State tonight, who is battling them still Boise State's 9-5. I actually didn't realize that. But New Mexico's kind of trying to solidify themselves at the top. They have a 2-game lead in the Mountain West. If they can go on the road and win at Boise State, it would go a long way towards keeping themselves up there. But they have a tough week ahead here with this game at Boise State, and then at San Diego State on Tuesday of next week. Those will pretty much set the tone for if they are going to run away with the league or not. But this New Mexico team has been incredibly fun to watch. Donovan Dent has emerged as one of the best guards in all of college basketball. You have Nelly Jr. Joseph there as well around the basket with what he's doing. True Washington is an outstanding shooter for the Lobos as well. And you're going to be in a position where these guys are going to be very highly sought after potentially in the transfer portal. Coach Pitino is likely to have his name emerge for some high major jobs once again during this next cycle, but definitely one worth watching tonight. Let's see, that is a 10 p.m. tip-off on CBS Sports Network for some late night crowd tonight. New Mexico at Boise State. Alabama is at Missouri tonight. Certainly the game probably of the night in terms of the overall slate on the college hoop scene. This one's pretty much a pick 'em in the betting markets. Missouri turning around. Coach Dennis Gates, as should be mentioned among the National Coach of the Year contenders. They were 0-18 in the Southeastern Conference last season, and then now in the best Southeastern Conference that we've ever seen, they are 8-4, 19-6 overall, and they have a chance to really, really make a statement tonight against Alabama, who's obviously coming off of that home loss to Auburn on Saturday. Also, Coach Calipari and the Razorbacks going to take on number 1 Auburn at Auburn this evening. This is the type of game we saw Arkansas go into Kentucky and win earlier this season in one of the most anticipated games of the year. This is the type of games like that. High profile opponent, really, really good opponent. Number 1 next to Auburn, the Auburn Tigers name. Don't be surprised if Coach Cal has some magic in there somewhere and makes this one interesting this evening. And then you obviously have Vanderbilt at Rupp Arena. The weather's not going to be great in Lexington. Trav, you're down there right now. I don't know if there's already weather happening, what the snow accumulation is down there in Lexington, but hopefully everybody's able to stay safe getting themselves to Rupp Arena because Kentucky really, really needs this one tonight. It's still a depleted roster. No Lamont Butler, no Jackson Robinson, no Kirk Kriisa, but similar to a couple weeks ago when Kentucky had to win that home game against South Carolina, and they did just that and followed it up with a win against Tennessee. You have to win tonight against Vanderbilt because as frustrating as it was to lose that game at Texas or some of these other games along the way, again, they're pretty much all quad 1 games, so they just don't really hurt you that much. But this is a quad 2 game tonight. This is probably a seed line loss for Kentucky if they can't find a way to pull it out, even with the depleted roster. So you are in a situation where you have to find a way to win. And again, part of it is because you still have to go to Alabama on Saturday. You still have to go to Oklahoma. You still have to go to Missouri. You have Auburn coming to Rupp Arena. So you have to find those wins as they come somewhere. And as good as Vanderbilt is this season, unfortunately for Kentucky, this is one of the easier ones on paper still to come. That's what made that loss at Texas hurt so much. It wasn't that you lost at Texas. Nobody should have really expected Kentucky with the roster they had to go down there and win. But once you had an opportunity to win it, then it really, really hurts you when you don't close it out because there's just not that many good chances, even at full strength, but certainly missing key guys. There's just not that many good opportunities to get a win. So you really need to see the Wildcats bounce back tonight. Travis says schools closed in Lexington 2 inches and more maybe to come. That's what it sounded like down there. It's all stopped up here in Indiana. We probably got, I don't know, maybe an inch overnight, probably not even that. But hopefully everybody stays safe. Once again, prayers to those in Eastern Kentucky, but also stay safe here in the Lexington area, heading to Rupp Arena tonight and getting back home. But there we have it for today's episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. Covered a lot of ground there. I hope you all are ready for a fun night of college basketball heading into yet another busy weekend. Again, if you were watching on YouTube, please leave a like on the video. If you're watching sometime in the future, you can just drop into the comments and I'll get back to you at some point there. Make sure you're subscribed to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel. We have podcast episodes every Monday and Friday, and then obviously this live show, All Fired Up, every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So we'll be back a week from now. And then also on Twitter, follow me at BRamseyKSR. Thank you all for being here and have a great rest of your day.